Let's talk to Robert Palmer. He's Director of Tax at Justice UK and joins us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you very much indeed. I am always fascinated. This story keeps coming back again and again and again. Inheritance tax. The Conservatives are looking at possibly cutting inheritance tax. This is a pledge that Rishi Sunak wants to make as a sort of a long-term decisions at the Tory Party conference next month. Now, the key thing about this is that next week, actually, what am I saying? The key thing about this is inheritance tax, we're told in polling, is the most hated tax. People, it's a death tax. It's a tax on you when you've worked hard and looked after your money, been responsible, done the right thing. You want to hand it on to your children, wherever your house, your savings, and then the government comes along and takes 40% from it. But the reality is only a tiny, tiny percentage of people ever pay this tax.
I mean, you're absolutely right, Julia. I think what a lot of people perhaps don't quite realise is that you can inherit up to £1 million entirely tax-free, and then only pay the tax on top of that £1 million. And so inheritance tax is paid by a very, very small number of quite wealthy families around the country. But as you suggested, I think one of the reasons as well that people really don't like it is the really rich can find ways of avoiding it.
I was just going to say to you, because people say it's the tax on the very wealthy. It's not. It's the very wealthy set up trusts. They don't actually pay this, and so it's sort of kind of the sort of upper middle classes you get here. But then the argument seems to be, look, they've paid taxes. Any sum of money you've got, which you hand over at that point, you've already paid 45% tax on, and now you're being clobbered again. And that's where that sense that people feel it's unfair. But an awful lot of the people in polling who were asked about this, even though they don't think they would be affected right now or their children, they still object to this tax. There's a sort of principle that, but I've paid the tax, it's my money, I should be able to give it to my kids if I want.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of things there. First of all, when people inherit, most people are inheriting, a house or a pension. And actually, people haven't really paid very much tax on their pension, deliberately to encourage people to save. And a lot of people won't have paid tax on the kind of big increases that we've seen on houses over the last 20 or 30 years. So, I mean, I do understand why people are, dislike it as it seems like a sort of punitive attack. But it's really paid by a very small number of people. I think we should be thinking about closing the loopholes, ensuring the very wealthy do pay it. That might free up money to reduce tax on the rest of us. And I think that comes to the kind of second big issue that I have with this from a political point of view, which is this would be a government spending £7 billion on a tax cut that would go to the mostly pretty well off. And does that mean that we're going to get £7 billion worth of public spending cuts? Or does it mean that we're going to get £7 billion of tax rises on the rest of us somehow? So it just seems like a slightly odd priority when we're in a cost of living crisis, when people are struggling to, going into a winter when people will struggle to heat their homes, and we have schools literally crumbling around us.
Yeah, I feel very much, look, I'd like us to live in a lower tax economy. I do feel there is an element where if someone has just spent all that money and wine, women and song, they don't end up having to pay that, or their kids don't end up having to pay that, but then they don't get the inheritance. There's an element where, if your parents have made a load of money, whether it's from the house or they bought, at the bottom of the market and the house value's gone up, or they've set up a business, been very successful, you haven't done the hard work to make that money. I can see the arguments for inheritance tax, but there is also this sense that, people work hard to benefit themselves and their families. They want to be able to pass it on to their children, to their grandchildren. It's one of the main motivating forces of human beings. We've seen why, it doesn't work in, communist societies. People go, well, if I'm not going to get any benefit from it, I'm not going to work harder. Is there an argument that just a lower rate, people would say, OK, fair enough, a certain percentage is going to go to the government, it's unearned, for the person who inherits, and really it's the person who inherits who pays the tax, not the person who's died, 20% maybe. Is it the sense that it's such a big chunk? It's 40%, and people feel, well, hold on a minute, you're taking a huge chunk of money that has already been taxed.
Yeah, and one argument you could make is let's close the loopholes. Let's make sure the really rich are actually paying this tax. And we can do that now. We've got much better data on where people's assets are. It's much easier to tax the wealthy than it used to be. And we could use that to lower taxes elsewhere, whether that's inheritance tax or income tax or elsewhere. I just think it's a strange political priority to be cutting tax for actually a pretty small number of pretty well-off people.
And yet it would be popular. That's the interesting thing. What about the triple lock on pensions? That's another another story that's been in the news. We understand, Rishi Sunak, he's already said they're going to keep the triple lock on pensions, which will basically mean an 8.5% increase in pensions next year based on inflation rates. The triple lock means that it can only pension must go up by a minimum of 2.5%, whether it's wages or price inflation is the highest. That's what pensioners get. Now the plan is to, despite this massive cost on the state, basically pledge that after the next election. Is that just politics, that actually the grey vote is so huge no politician could actually pledge to get rid of that now?
Well, I mean, I think we have one of the stingiest public pensions in the rich world. If you look at other countries, European countries elsewhere, they've got much more generous public pensions, and ours is pretty stingy. And we still have a lot of pensioners in poverty, although that has reduced quite a lot over the last 10 or 20 years, which I think is a really good, it's a good news story. But I think it shows a wider point, which is it's quite easy for politicians to say we're going to cut taxes. It's much, much, much harder for politicians to identify where they're going to make spending cuts. And what we've seen over the last 4, 5, 6 years from the Conservative government is, even though it's been led by people who said that they want tax cuts, ultimately, when push has come to shove, the government has put up public spending and increased taxes. And I think that ultimately reflects where the public is at as well.
All right, Robert Palmer, great to talk to you.